Welcome into another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. As you guys can tell, that is not Alan Saunders with me. And I feel like every time that you guys hear the music that doesn't have the, our names in it, you know who's going to be on your screen when we get to the end of the intro. It's Nick Farabaugh for the first time in over a month on the show. Welcome back, Nick. How we doing?
Yeah, we're doing well, Smitty. It's snowy out here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, we're getting some snow.
Me and Alan brought the snow from Buffalo back to Pittsburgh. We're not getting like 3 feet like Buffalo did, but it's like 3 inches. And basically, the way Pittsburgh reacts to 3 inches is the same way Buffalo reacts to 3 feet. So, may as
Mhm.
well be the same thing.
Alan was taunting Mother Nature on Locked On Steelers, and that's why that it has followed him around. Gave it 3 stall grade for the weather's performance in Baltimore, and then gave it a bus ticket for Buffalo. Well, it took that bus ticket and rode the bus to Pittsburgh to come
Yeah.
back with him. So
I,
here we are. We are here though,
I'll
Nick,
tell you what,
and yeah,
Smitty, I'm going to Dallas next week for the Shrine game. If it is in
yes.
Dallas, I'm cursed.
Okay. Is this the first Shrine you're doing the Shrine game? Is this the first time you've done the Shrine one?
Yeah, it's the first time I'll be at the Shrine game. I'll be out there 4 days next week, going straight to
Okay.
Mobile. So I will hit both the Shrine game and the Senior Bowl.
Oh,
It'll
okay, that's
be
what I was gonna say. Is it in place of? Because I know
no,
Alan's going to the
it'll be
Senior Bowl.
both.
All right, cool.
So I get to do both this year, which is interesting. I've never done that, but I'm excited. So I get to talk to double the prospects. So like that's cool.
Mhm.
I've never been out there, and it's in Dallas for the first time this year. For the first time, it was in Vegas before. So I'm excited. I'm excited to go out there and see what the Shrine game is all about.
Love to see it. And of course, everybody be following along for the content that comes from there. Nick, we got a lot of questions from Twitter, which we can get into and see where it goes from there. Because I know that we have some ideas of topics we want to kick around, but I also think that a lot of what we wanted to talk about anyway is going to be covered by these questions. So I actually want to start with a really fun one for you. Because Ross wants to know, he gave us a start bench cut, which is interesting.
Ooh.
Uh, and the players on it are Neil O'Donnell, Tommy Maddox, and Mason Rudolph. I
Oh,
mean, yeah. And okay, Neil O'Donnell has made a Pro Bowl. He has far more, like his touchdown interception ratio, much better than the others. I feel like he's the obvious start here.
he's like it's like basically your average quarterback.
Yeah. I think what,
In
like, obviously bad taste in the mouths of Steelers fans for the Super Bowl, but like overall, the numbers better than the other two.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he's basically, if you look back at his numbers, I mean, the touchdowns aren't great, but like that's the 90s too. And like, I don't know, he's basically early 1990s Ryan Tannehill, Jimmy Garoppolo, whatever you might want to put in that like
Mhm.
that tier of guy. So yeah, he's the obvious start because he actually was an NFL starter and a legit NFL starter. Tommy Maddox. The thing with Mason is we have previously a sample that would only suggest he was a true backup.
Mhm.
And before that 4 game stretch, which he has looked basically like a spot starter backup kind of
Mhm.
on the fringe, like he has played legitimately well. Like I think we can't take any credit away from him. Like he has legitimately played like a Jacoby Brissett, a Jameis Winston. Like he has played like a Jake Browning. Like he is in that tier of quarterbacks now, and he's played better than some of them. Like honestly, like I watched the Buffalo tape back. Like honestly, wasn't that bad. I thought, if he throws that ball on the white a little bit more to Deontay, who knows what happens if George doesn't fumble? Like I understand he's not like an elite quarterback, but he did not play bad. Tommy Maddox, I mean, before he came to Pittsburgh, was basically nobody, right?
Right.
2002 was basically his breakout season after he hadn't played since 1992. And his career is obviously so weird just because he has a huge gap from
Mhm.
1995 to 2001, where he basically didn't
Yeah.
play. So
Yeah,
it's
he
tough.
was 30 when he got to Pittsburgh. Like, he was
Yeah.
older when he got to Pittsburgh than Mason is right now.
Yeah. I mean, like, it is very odd. And like Tommy Maddox, legitimately, when he played, I mean, you're talking about 48 touchdowns to 54. I
Mhm.
mean, that is tough because he legitimately was not that good. Um, I don't know. Tommy Maddox has put together some pretty good games before. Um, '03 obviously didn't go how you wanted it to go, but '02 is pretty solid for a season overall. I mean, went 7-3-1 as a starter. Had 20 touchdowns to 16 picks. That was just chaos. I don't know. That's a tough one. Probably bench Tommy and cut Mason for right now.
I
Just
yeah.
because, like, I don't have like the sample size on Mason that I do on either of these two. Like, if
Mhm.
Mason keeps playing at this level for like 25 games, I think we can put Mason over Tommy Maddox. But
I would agree with that.
I just,
I also think it's
what
important,
is
like, at least for me, I'm just looking at the Pittsburgh part of these sample sizes. Like, for Tommy Maddox, I'm not including the Denver
yeah.
Rams or Giants time, like, and I didn't do that with Neil O'Donnell's time elsewhere either.
Yeah, so I think Neil start bench Maddox cut Mason right now, but hey, potential for Mason to move up that list. I think if he
Yeah.
plays the way he did the last 4 weeks,
Neil's still starting though, so,
yeah. So
um, this is something we definitely wanted to get into because Nick wants to know our predictions for the new offensive coordinator hire.
yeah, this is kind of interesting. I think Mike Tomlin gave us more criteria than I ever thought he would.
Sure, yeah.
Like we have a big outline now of
Laid
what
out a
he
blueprint.
wants. Outside, I think the two things people are overlooking outside of the experienced one is he said he wants the guy to have quarterback background. So that's a big one. That eliminates a lot of these run game coordinator types that you're looking at, like an Anthony Lynn, for example. And then I think the fourth was he said a diverse and varied scheme, which tells me where this would go personally to me is what's the most diverse and varied scheme in the NFL right now? The McVay branch is where I would look. I don't
Mhm.
know. Everything that has been flickering on and off has gone towards like Shane Waldron. Like that's been a big one to me. Quarterback background, McVay scheme, varied scheme, experienced play call. All of those. Also, if you want to put in, OC quarterback kind of pairs, Drew Lock. So there's kind of like one
I
there.
literally had that in a tweet yesterday. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know if
think
you
it just
saw
makes
that.
sense, right? I
I
also
had
think
a go ahead.
I also just think, and this is on the same vein, I believe you also had this guy and a quarterback on there. I think Pep Hamilton is also just a very obvious
Mhm.
candidate. I mean, was interviewed
Yeah.
before in 21, quarterback background, quarterback guru. I would be a little underwhelmed by that hire personally. Um, I love Pep's quarterback background. I don't love his scheme. I think that is
Yeah.
something
Well,
that
so
leaves
would you
room
be
to
more on
develop.
board with him being the quarterback's coach, like hiring somebody else as the OC and him as the quarterback's coach?
Yeah, that'd be a home run. If you get Pep Hamilton as the quarterback's coach, like,
Yeah.
you can't get a better quarterbacks coach out there right now than that. So
Mhm.
I think that'd be an awesome hire for them as QB coach. I do wonder when he said coordinator experience if he would stretch that to pass game coordinator. Like, would a Zach Robinson be in play here, where hasn't had OC experience, played quarterback in the NFL though, is the pass game coordinator for the Rams, and you saw what happened to the Rams pass game this year, just took
Goes
off.
back to the McVay stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the McVay stuff. So I'm like looking at the McVay scheme type or a known QB guru like a Daryl Beevil, who is obviously with Mike
Yeah.
McDaniel's staff right now, who is literally part of every schematic kind of change over the past 15 years. Like Daryl Beevil can be connected in that web somehow, and he has
Mhm.
adapted his scheme. That makes a lot of sense to me. Like Daryl Beevil is kind of I think what Mike Tomlin wanted to do by hiring Matt Canada was get into the Shanahan-ish scheme because Shanahan, McVay, and Andy Reid have all borrowed parts of what Matt Canada did and implemented it in. But
Mhm.
instead, he got like the 2015 version of that never evolved and
Mhm.
is like the faux Shanahan scheme. So I think
Yeah.
he's going to look for that now. Um, I think the McVay branch is very interesting. There's enough out there, to look at the Zach Robinson, the Shane Waldrons of the world. And then you kind of look elsewhere and you say the Shanahan part of that also has a lot. Clint Kubiak obviously is a big one.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Just Clint Kubiak makes a lot of sense for me. Experienced, comes from a football background, knows Gary Kubiak, has been around forever. And that's something that they could like. and that I know Mike Tomlin probably likes because he sees it twice a year every time he plays Kevin Stefanski and the Browns. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure he knows that, and sure he likes that. So those are just kind of my initial thoughts. I think those are really good candidates. I expect this candidate, and I said this yesterday on Twitter too. I personally, if it is not Pep Hamilton, I do expect this candidate to come from the Shanahan McVay tree, just because they've implemented so much of the Shanahan McVay tree into their run game. And also because I feel like that's what they were trying to do when they hired Matt Canada. So
Yeah.
I feel like it's just a natural progression for what Mike Tomlin wants. Um, and I think there's a lot of ways to go about this hire to get a good coach. Maybe you compromise a little bit of scheme to get the better quarterback tweaking. Like maybe Daryl Beevil isn't this, mastermind where his offenses have been elite every year, but they've been around, 10 to 14 each year. But he's proven he can develop quarterbacks. So maybe that's kind of where you go. I don't know. I think there's a lot of ways you can go about this, but I would be going to that Shanahan McVay tree just because it fits their scheme really well. They're already doing that stuff on the ground game, and we saw how good the ground game was later in the year. And I want to keep that part of the scheme because I feel like they ran one of the most diverse run schemes in the NFL. And they basically did what Sean McVay was doing this year on the ground game. So I like that. I thought that they were really ahead of the curve in the run game. So now spice up the pass game. And I think the quarterback's coach is why they're going that direction. I think Mike Tomlin likes what he has in the ground game, but they need to figure out what they're going to do in the pass game. And that's why I threw out a name like Zach Robinson, who is a pass game coordinator. Does that qualify? Probably not, but it could land him an interview. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, the two names that you mentioned that I've had at the top of my or would have at the top of my list would be Shane Waldron and Clint Kubiak. I think either one of those ones are a home run. And there's other ones that intrigue me for sure, but there's certainly 1A, 1B for me. And we've talked about like the pairing of a vet, right? Because we know that Kenny Pickett's going to be back. Mason Rudolph certainly could be mid-round draft pick, maybe. Whether it's Mason Rudolph or somebody else, though, you would think that vet is really the one that is kind of like the guy that's familiar with whatever system is being implemented by the guy. So that's why I had that list yesterday of just like what made sense, like Shane Waldron, Drew Lock. The one thing you didn't mention that I wanted to bring up was Eric Bieniemy, just because he could get left in the cold in Washington. There it seems like Washington's kind of just waiting to hire Ben Johnson once Detroit's season ends. I think that's going to end up being a thing, and Eric Bieniemy could get left in the cold. Could it be a situation similarly to, obviously there was a lot of different variables with why Brian Flores was kind of left in the cold of the head coaching when Tomlin brought him in, but Eric Bieniemy just seems like a situation to me where Tomlin could extend that olive branch and want to bring in a guy like Eric Bieniemy and give him a shot.
I think that's possible. I also will say though he comes from a running back background, not a quarterback background. So
Yeah.
does that affect that? I don't know. Bieniemy might be one of those guys where it's like he's so good that he'll throw out one of those qualifications. Like I could see that being a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense to me too. You have that natural Jacoby Brissett tie-in that we were talking about. If that's what you want. Um, Little concerned about the lack of offensive success they had this year in Washington. Some of that was
Yeah.
Sam Howell, I understand, but also it really was not a good offense. But Brissett came in and they looked good. So I think I'm willing to bet it was a little bit more on personnel than scheme.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Bieniemy is an interesting name. Kellen Moore is an interesting name there too, right? With the
Mm,
Chargers, he
yeah.
could be he fits the bill too. Quarterback background. Haven't seen him mentioned much at all, so thought I would throw
Mm,
his name out there. Another McVay guy, Liam Cohn, Kentucky
yeah.
OC right now. He was the OC for the Rams last year. So kind of a few different names there. I though am personally on the train. I think I prefer Waldron. I think that's who I would want right now. I like what he did in Seattle. I like that he overcame offensive line limitations too. I
Yeah.
think that's a
Yeah.
good thing. Like if the Steelers can't hit on a tackle or a center, and you're gonna have to deal with offensive line limitations, I like that. Runs a diverse, varied run game. I like that. Kind of has this experience moving around receivers, using them well. I think he's a really good fit, and I think if you're bringing Mason back too, I love Mason's fit in that scheme. Um,
Mm,
I think he can operate very similarly in the way we have seen. I don't not the level of it, because Gino's just been awesome with what he's done, and Gino's honestly been a top 15, 14 quarterback since he's taken over that job. But like Mason Rudolph can do some of the similar schematic things that and work off those that Gino has. So I do like that fit too. If you're bringing Mason back, so I like Waldron a lot. I think that is my favorite kind of fit. Has done such a great job in Washington, in Seattle. I think people have kind of underrated how good he did there with the O line limitations he had this year. He did a really nice job, and so would like to see that. My second on the list, I'm a big Zach Robinson guy. I understand that he hasn't been an OC yet, but what he did to that passing game this year, how they kind of evolved in the passing game with Puka now in there and everything, I thought was really good.
Yeah.
Um, I like Kubiak too, as a potential option, and I think Pep Hamilton's a really good quarterback coach kind of
Yeah.
implementation into that. So
Mhm.
we'll kind of see. I think there are so many non-coordinator experienced guys that are super interesting to me too. I do. Keenan
Mhm.
McCardell, Ashton Grant with the Browns, Robinson's one of those guys. We've talked Gerard Johnson. Like, there's a lot of really interesting players, but pretty clearly, based off Tomlin's comments, I don't think we should be expecting any of those guys to be the hire.
Yeah. Well, let me parlay those thoughts that you just expressed because maybe this isn't even part of the discussion for you. But assuming Kenny is QB1, and this comes from John, which OC do you think is the best suited for Kenny Pickett specifically going into next season? Like, how much of I would think the entirety of selecting an offensive coordinator has to be surrounded around getting the most out of Kenny Pickett. But which of these offensive coordinator candidates in your mind is the best to get the best out of Kenny Pickett?
Yeah, it's how good of a play action thrower is Kenny? I think that's the question. I think Waldron's a cool fit because he does run a lot of under center play action, and the Steelers haven't done that a lot. And we kind of saw what happened when they finally did do that against the Bills. That's finally when they started to move the ball, when they hit that big play to Fryermuth down on the
Mhm.
goal line, and they started to run that a little bit. Kenny's interesting because what he does really well is chaos. So it's hard to scheme him, right? Because he's kind of a chaos agent that does break structure, that makes plays out of structure, doesn't always hit the correct read. Like Mason hits the right read. So what you're looking with Mason is okay, who can scheme this guy open, and just let him kind of hit the guy. Like that's what you want with that. Kenny's interesting because sometimes he will pass up an open guy in search of the big play or in search of the chaos. The pocket movement isn't as swift. And so that is kind of a special thing he has. And so as an OC, I want to accentuate that, but I want to tighten up the reins to get him to play in structure, which is why play action to me is so important because that'll get Kenny to play in structure, hit the guy with anticipation, open up the middle of the field for him. Like that'll get him the explosive plays. You talk about the touchdown percentage being so low all the time, right? I think it's like
Mhm.
1.9 for his career so
Yeah.
far. Like a big reason is Kenny doesn't really test that middle of the field a ton. But also OCs haven't been able to open it up for him. In the first game we saw where an OC deliberately attacked the middle of the field, I mean, he looked pretty good doing it. Like I think that is something he can do when he knows what's coming, when he knows what the read's going to be. I think he can be decisive. So get somebody in here that you know can scheme someone open, make Kenny a confident quarterback, and kind of rein in the chaos a little bit of what he does to keep him in the pocket. So play action is a big part of that under center play action, where he can turn his back and go wham right back, hit that wrap in or hit that curl, hit that dig, um, hit that sail route, hit those different routes that we saw over the season with Mike Sullivan and Eddie Faulkner as they layered the run game a little bit. Like, let's let him do that. That'll make him more confident. When Kenny Pickett is confident in what he's going to see and what is kind of going to be shown in the picture, he becomes a lot better of a quarterback in structure because he becomes more decisive. He's a very vibes quarterback. Like he needs confidence. And
Yeah.
so Shane Waldron is a guy that has just been able to scheme up open guys consistently. There's guys running
Yeah.
wide open all over Seattle's film. I think that would be really good for Kenny. I also think Kenny has a pretty underrated deep ball. Like I think that's something that they really utilize. I think they utilize Gino's deep ball a lot in Seattle, and I think that you can use Kenny's kind of ability to do that too. When Kenny's really confident, and he was feeling it in that Cincinnati game that he played, he gets some arm arrogance. Like you can see when he is more confident, he makes some throws he would never attempt when he's not. Like watch those six
Mhm.
quarters before he hurt his ankle and watch kind of what the shots he was taking a little bit more. Like he would take those shots more. And so I think that's an interesting wrinkle too. So someone that can accentuate his deep ball, because I think he has a pretty solid deep ball and it's pretty underrated, and someone that kind of reins in his chaos a little bit and gets him in structure more to read and trust what's coming. So I think Waldron is my favorite from that perspective too. I think Waldron's the best of both
Yeah.
worlds. I think he just fits really what Kenny and Mason do well.
Yeah, and I think to your point, not losing anything in the run game as well because of the diverse concepts that he runs, ability to get the most out of it despite offensive line limitations, wide receiver, the other things that independently outside of Kenny also happen with the offense are all going to benefit Kenny too for Shane Waldron. You've talked me into this Shane Waldron as OC, and I don't know if it's possible, but if you can get Pep Hamilton as the quarterback coach along with that, man, I mean, this offensive staff already they're cooking. I don't know. Let me ask you because this wasn't on here. Um, New OC, you would like to think that they would bring in a lot of their own personnel anyway. So, like, how much of this offensive staff are you expecting to be turned over?
I think a lot of it will be. I hope Eddie Faulkner's back. I really do. That
Yeah.
running back room has been so good under him consistently. We've seen the growth of Jalen Warren. We've seen Najee grow from his rookie year. I really like what he's done with that running back room. So I really hope that Eddie comes back because Eddie's also a big part of that run game and what we have seen. Basically, I'm pretty sure that Eddie is the run game coordinator that we were seeing with all these varied kind of schemes that they were doing, implementing different things. So, really want Eddie
Mhm.
Faulkner back because I think that'll keep the
Yeah.
continuity of the run game on. I think that you probably should look for a new tight ends coach. Um, that makes
Okay.
sense to me. New wide receivers coach, I feel like, is a must.
Yeah.
Just have not. George has improved, but just have not seen that group kind of display the consistency you need consistently. And then Pat Meyer had a great year last year. I thought they got better on the stretch, but Broderick never actually, playing out of
Mm,
position. I think that's a
yep.
big thing. Dotson not playing in the natural spot. How much of that is Pat Meyer? How much of that is Tomlin? I don't know, but under his guidance, we have seen a lot of guys out of position. So I would
Mhm.
like to see a switch there as well and keep Eddie kind of as that run game conduit that can keep it on. So basically, I would be cool with the whole staff aside from Eddie Faulkner. I
Yeah.
just really like Eddie as a position coach, really smart
Same.
leader. I think I think the offensive staff is very underwhelming when you look at it from a big point of view. I think the defensive staff is much better when you look at it. The development on the defensive side of the football is apparent. Like Joey is getting
Mhm.
better over the course of the year under Grady Brown. Like we are seeing that. We are seeing the defensive linemen get better over the year. Keanu Benton under Carl Dunbar. We're seeing what Aaron Curry did with those inside linebackers. Like the defensive staff is pretty good in terms of development positionally. That's before the
Well,
discussion of Teryl Austin, right?
hey,
That
hey, I didn't even say that this was going to be the next question, but Ken's question was about Teryl Austin.
yeah.
Do you see the Steelers replacing Austin as DC? And if so, is there a target that you would have in mind? I think this is very interesting because typically, like when the Steelers have moved on from a coordinator, it's on one side of the ball at a time. Like we haven't seen them do. Could you imagine them searching for an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator at the exact same time?
I think this would be so easy for me to say. Um, I would I actually think, and I do think they're going to keep TA. Because I think for the exact reason. I don't think they want to do a double pronged search at OC and DC.
Hmm.
Also because I think he has a good defensive staff. Like I like Grady. I like Aaron Curry. I like Denzel Martin. I like Carl Dunbar. Like the defensive assistants are good to me. Like we see development of players over that side of the ball consistently. Now we don't see the deployment of that personnel always correct. I think that's something. And what I think they need on that side of the ball is a Brian Flores. They need a
Yeah.
senior defensive assistant that specializes in the front. I think that's the big thing. You know, what Brian Flores brought last year was all these exotic blitzes and all these looks up front that just disappeared from the playbook this year, or were deeper in the playbook because I don't think TA is super confident in deploying them. Um, and he does call the plays. Like Mike Tomlin, sure, probably has a say in the defensive staff, but like TA does call the plays, and so I've seen influence from TA. I've seen them move to more too high. I've seen them do different zone looks. He needs someone that can dial up the blitzes, that can bring that kind of expertise. So a senior defensive assistant that specializes in the front
Mhm.
seven, that's a blitz guru, I think is the way to go here. And there will be guys that are out there that can do that. Um, if they moved on from him, I think Wink Martindale would be a pretty awesome hire.
Yes.
I,
Yeah.
I, I really do. I think he would be good. Chris Richard, I think, also would be a really good hire for them in terms of what he can do with the back end. I think there are really a lot of good candidates out there that could fit that mold. I mean, even if they did an internal hire there, I think Grady Brown is a future defensive coordinator. Like, I think he
Mhm.
will be a DC someday. So, like,
I was gonna ask
they're
you about Ryan Nielsen.
yeah, Ryan Nielsen's interesting too. Like, there's a lot of interesting coordinators out there. I think I would just pluck a senior defensive assistant though, because I
Yeah.
really think that's what they're
Yeah.
missing. I think they just need
Mhm.
someone to specialize in the front seven. Because, like, look at the whole defensive staff's background. Like, Tomlin's a secondary background, TA's a secondary background. What made some of those defenses in 2019, 2020 so well when the personnel got better, it was the fact that Tomlin's secondary influences met Keith Butler's linebacker front seven influences. And so they were able to really kind of get going. And I
Yeah.
wish we had seen a fully healthy TJ Watt throughout all of last year, because what they did to Joe Burrow in that game was pretty incredible. I mean, they were disguising things up front, sending blitzes, and we saw it towards the end of last year when they started to get TJ more healthy and they really rattled it off. Teams just couldn't really get anything against them, aside from the Bengals, who really kind of cracked it down. So I wish we had seen that. If they move on from TA, I'm not. It's not going to be like the end of the world. I think it makes sense, um, but I don't think they will. I would add a senior defensive assistant there that can add some blitz packages and spice up the front seven for those blitzes, because it was so boring to watch the blitzes this year. They
Mhm.
would disguise the back end, but when you're not doing anything up front to threaten the quarterback, it's really hard, and you can get diced up by the quick game. And so,
Yeah.
would really like to see that kind of improve. But yeah, and then offensive staff, I would clean slate aside from Eddie.
Yeah, we Alan and I have talked a ton about like losing Flores was kind of inevitable unless you were going to unless you were going to fire TA and make him the DC after last year. But not replacing him was really where they went wrong. Um, Dalton wants to know: will center be something that's addressed day one in the draft? Do you think, or do you think that they could go tackle slash cornerback and say address it with something like Van Pran, Frazier, Powers in round two? Would that make more sense?
So there are probably three different tiers of those centers. I think Powers Johnson by the end of this is going to be a first round draft pick. That's what I've heard from a lot
Another
of.
JPJ.
Yeah, another JPJ, right? So I don't know if he's going to be in play for 20. He
Yeah.
might be that guy that's like going to go 29, but it's just two, but 20s earlier. And I think Frazier and Van Pran will be there at 51. So I expect a day two pick. Um, I think Zach Frazier is probably going to be the pick. I don't know. I haven't talked to Zach Frazier yet. I will in Mobile. That one
Mhm.
just feels like a Steelers pick to me.
Yeah, it's like the same last year as like some of it, like a Keanu Benton last year or Herbig. Like those guys just felt like Steelers, and already very early in this process, I get the same vibe from Zach Frazier.
I really do. I agree. I think he probably is the one that ends up being there. And it'd be a great pick. He's a really good player. And so I
Mhm.
think they'll address center day two of the draft, probably in round two. Zach Frazier or Van Pran, whichever one.
Actually, let me couple another question just to knock this one out of the
Mhm.
way as well. Because Matt, very similar question. How much would a decent center do for the offense? Like how limited was the offense this year due to the lack of reliability at the position? What they were getting from Mason Cole?
Well, center is interesting because it's an important position, but not so important that it will change your offense. But Mason Cole's inability to snap the football, I think, is where the biggest thing's going
Yeah.
to change. Like
Mhm.
how many times they just got hurt on drives by bad snaps was incredible. And it also will make sure that interior rushers just can't bully them up the middle. Ed Oliver absolutely destroyed Mason Cole all
Yeah.
game. And
Yep.
so what it'll
What
allow
do you have,
you
like
to
7
do,
pressures, something like that?
yeah, 7 pressures. And what it'll allow you to do is when you've seen their gap concepts, a lot of them are run outside the tackle or up through Sayamalo and Moore or outside Daniels and Jones. They really haven't been able to run a ton between Sayamalo, Cole, Daniels. Like that hasn't been a gap that they've hit a ton. And when they have hit it, they have schematically taken the nose out of it to give Mason Cole easier spots. What the Bills did was they were saying, okay, we're going to key down on this anyways, and we're going to force that guy to block our guy. And teams are just going to do that next year if that's the case. So it will help the run game because the run game then can hit different holes and can hit different runs, right? Because they were running crunch a ton, Zorro toss, they were running duo a lot. Well, that brings in, if you get a good center that can get vertical movement, there goes wide zone back into the playbook because you can get that cutback right near the center, inside zones. Like they can do different
Mhm.
things and get back to the bread and butter and really open this up to a full playbook. And I think that could be really cool. So I think that's where the biggest thing will be. It's just actually snapping the football and creating this run diversity that's really going to be kind of tenable into next year.
Yeah, we were already talking about, like, how it is a diverse run game, but, like, imagine the success rate that they could be having if you actually have a center that is able to climb to the second level, isn't getting blown off his blocks, and actually offers something in pass protection as well, because, again, what Ed Oliver did to him, on Monday, he should be tried in court for, in
Yeah,
my opinion.
it would change the offense in a nice way. If they
Mhm.
can just get average pass protecting up the middle, I mean, it really would. And it would make Kenny Pickett more comfortable too, because a lot of times when he spins out of the pocket, it's always that interior pressure that peaks and gets him to go. So if your
Yeah.
center's holding up better and Kenny trusts the center more, I think you'll see him be able to stick more into the pocket.
Okay, and then we got one more here, and this is from Lord Megatron's Op. And I'm not sure what the inspiration is for the name here, but appreciate the question. This is totally switching gears here. We're going from the draft to free agency. What position should be the priority in free agency? And Nick, I think what I'm looking at here is because of the needs that they can check off in the draft and what is the strength of a free agent class. This typically isn't a position and this isn't a position that I want to invest highly in the draft. Safety, pretty good safety free agent class. I think you could look to free agency to address their safety concerns and not have to check that box in the draft.
The whole secondary should come from the free agency period. That's my take. I like a lot of what the secondary brings to the table in the draft. There's a lot of good options at 20. Nate Wiggins, Cooper DeJean, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Quinion Mitchell. Like there are so many good good corners even beyond that. And then you look at nickels even beyond that, right? Mike
Mhm.
Sandstro, like so many good players that are going to be there. And I didn't even name like Terrion Arnold and all of these other guys. There are a lot of good secondary players. So what I mean is it's going to be deep. In round 3, I can get a starting nickel probably this year. Like that is legit what I think they can do. And what I want to see them do is rework the secondary. I think safety is a big one. I'm completely with you. I think that one should be addressed in free agency. I also think outside corner should be addressed in free agency. That's my take on that. I think that should be a big one. Or at least nickel. If you're not going to get if you're not getting an outside corner, get a starting nickel. Because I think the starting nickel killed them this year because Minka became the rundown nickel. That is why
Mhm.
Minka basically didn't make a ton of plays on the ball. Like he was a box
Yeah.
safety, Sam linebacker, slot corner. He basically took Arthur Maulet's role. Like I think they need to get him out of that because then you can make Minka the deep safety, the robber, the tight end guy. Like a big part of their tight end struggles was the fact Minka Fitzpatrick had to play in the slot. I think that was an underrated part of that. They didn't really have anyone else to replace him back there. They didn't have a Terrell Evans this year, and so
Yeah.
they need to get faster too. I think that's a big one. They need to get faster. Have to, have to, have to. That is a slow, slow secondary. So what I would do at safety is I'd probably move on from KZ and Neal. I'd bring back Eric Rowe. I thought he gave them some really good playing time. I
Yeah.
like Trent Thompson. And then I'd sign somebody. And that's a really good safety class. I'm with you on that. So bring in a safety. I think corner, there's a lot of big fish. If you want to make the big splash signing of free agency, it's going to be an outside corner. Jalen Johnson, L'Jarius Sneed, someone like that.
Dude, L'Jarius Sneed opposite of Joey Porter. You got the same player, basically.
Yes. It would be an unreal secondary. That would be one of the best duos, if not the best duo in the NFL. Like, legitimately.
And I love Jalen Johnson, too. Don't get me wrong. It's just Sneed and Porter Jr. are so much alike.
Like,
Crazy.
think of the AFC North cornerback rooms if that happens. Like
Mm-hmm.
what you have in Baltimore with Humphrey and Stevens and all those guys out there in Cleveland with Emerson, Newsome, and Ward, and then you would come back with Snead and Porter. Oh, would be really good. Would be really good. And that would help them just overall. And Snead is like Cam Sutton if he were athletic. Like we're talking about an elite player. I'm not sure if either of them are going to hit free agency. Maybe they both get tagged. We'll see.
Sure.
Kansas City is a tough decision to make because Chris Jones is also going to be a free agent. So maybe Snead hits the market. If he does, I would be very interested to make that splash if I were Omar Khan. That would take this secondary to the next level. That would make this defensive like it would give you everything you needed. And then you add a safety. So I think the secondary should be the big focus of free agency. I also would probably look to add the slot receiver in free agency. It's a good class in wide receiver depth, but there are a number of guys out there. I think like a Jaquan Jennings that could be interesting. That's just a really good blocker. Tyler Boyd. Like we're talking about some pretty good players that could fit in at receiver. But I think your biggest one should be corner and safety. I'm with you on that. Accentuate maybe the linebacker room, whatever you do there, add a linebacker. I would try and patch up most of my defensive needs, I think, through free agency. That's what I would do. And then, I mean, quarterback's going to probably come whether that's Mason or not in there too. So we'll kind of see. But the big project of free agency to me is the secondary. That's my take.
There we go. Nick, a lot of good stuff today. Anything else before we get out of here?
No. I think we're good. We covered like 20 bases, man. We covered 20 bases. So we're
Which
good.
is 5 home runs.
Yeah. It's 5 home runs.
We hit 5 home runs. All right, Nick, tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Farabaugh FB. Read the stuff at SteelersNow.com as well. Make sure to subscribe to the Steelers Now YouTube channel, of course.
Just crossed 11,000 subscribers on the Steelers Now YouTube channel, so keep that coming. We want to hit another milestone before the draft. Hey, if we can get to like 12K by draft, love to see it. You're going to have a lot of stuff coming from, obviously, Nick, Alan, Derek, a lot of on-site stuff from different locations that you're not used to seeing coverage from, some in-depth stuff that you can only get right here on the channel. So like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, hit us in the comments with some questions too for when Al and I are back after the weekend. I'm Zachary Smith, PGH, for Nick Farabaugh and myself. Thanks for jumping in. Take another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.